Welcome back to Dark Confessions from the Wasteland, where we explore the stories that Vault-Tec doesn't want you to hear. Today's confession comes from beneath Smith Casey's garage, from a vault that promised eternal paradise but delivered something far darker. I've died 10,000 times in this suburban hell, and the worst part is, I remember every single death, even though he thinks he's wiped my mind clean. My name is Thelma Deethers, and I've been 73 years old for the past 200 years, trapped in Vault 112's digital nightmare, while a monster wearing a little girl's face plays God with our minds. Everyone around me thinks they're living in 1955, but I know the truth. I know about the pods, the torture, the endless cycle of death and resurrection, and I'm the only one who remembers. The only one who knows that paradise is just another word for prison, and that Dr. Stanislaus Braun has been conducting the cruelest experiment of all. What happens to a human mind when it knows it's trapped forever, when it remembers every horror, when it understands that mercy might look like murder, and freedom might cost everything. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if you like the content. Let me tell you something that will sound impossible. This white picket fence I'm touching right now, this perfectly manicured lawn, this neighborhood where everyone waves and smiles, none of it is real. We're floating in pods underneath Smith Casey's garage, our bodies withered like ancient mummies, kept alive by machines while our minds rot in this digital prison. And I'm the only one who knows. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, or at least what I remember of it. October 23rd, 2077, the day the world ended. My husband Harold and I were shopping at the market when the sirens started. We'd heard the warnings on the radio for weeks, the tensions with China escalating, but nobody really believed it would happen. Not really. Not until we saw that mushroom cloud blooming on the horizon like a flower of fire and death. We ran. Everyone ran. The Vault-Tec representative found us in the chaos, shouting about Vault 112, about how we'd been selected, about how there was still time. Harold grabbed my hand, and we followed the crowd down into Smith Casey's garage. I remember thinking how strange it was that a garage would hide a vault entrance, but I was too terrified to question it. Dr. Stanislaus Braun met us at the entrance, tall, imposing, with eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. He spoke with a thick German accent, his words careful and precise. He told us we were the lucky ones. He told us about the Tranquility Loungers, about how we'd be suspended in a virtual paradise while the radiation cleared outside. He made it sound like a gift, like we'd won some cosmic lottery, forever young in a perfect world, he said. Who wouldn't want that? I remember the pod closing over me, the cushions soft against my back. I remember the hum of machinery, the feeling of falling, even though I was lying still. And then I woke up in paradise. Toucan Lagoon, they called it. A pristine beach with sand so white it hurt your eyes. Palm trees swaying in warm breezes that smelled of salt and flowers. The water was impossibly blue, stretching to a horizon that never seemed to end. Harold and I were young again, maybe in our 30s, healthy and strong. We had a bungalow right on the beach. It was perfect, too perfect. That should have been my first clue, but I was too drunk on the beauty of it to notice. We'd spend our days swimming, exploring tide pools, watching sunsets that painted the sky in colors I'd never seen before. There were maybe 30 of us on that beach, all the Vault residents, all young and carefree. We'd have bonfires at night, share stories, laugh until our sides hurt. Then Harold went swimming alone one morning. I was making breakfast in our little bungalow when I heard the screams. I ran to the water and saw the blood first. So much blood, turning that perfect blue water into something dark and wrong. The sharks came out of nowhere, their fins cutting through the surface like knives. Harold was thrashing, trying to get back to shore, but there were too many of them. I watched my husband get torn apart piece by piece, his screams cutting through the morning air until they suddenly stopped. I dove in after him. I don't know what I thought I could do, but I had to try. The water was warm against my skin, thick with blood, and then I felt teeth sink into my leg. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't clean, wasn't quick. The shark shook me like a dog with a rag doll, and I felt something inside me tear. Everything went dark. And then I woke up in a different place entirely. Snow, everywhere I looked, there was snow. Harold was next to me, whole and alive, with no memory of the sharks. He looked confused when I grabbed him, sobbing, asking him if he remembered. He thought I'd had a nightmare. The others were the same, settling into this new place like they'd always been there. But I remembered the teeth, the blood, the way Harold's eyes had gone empty in that crimson water. Slalom Chalet, Braun called this new simulation. The Swiss Alps, he said, though something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. We were in a ski resort, complete with lodges and chairlifts, and slopes that seemed to go on forever. It was beautiful in a cold, sterile way. Everything was white and pristine, the kind of place that looked like it belonged on a postcard. We were there for 23 years. I counted every single day, even though the others lost track after the first few months. Time works differently in these places. Days blend together, seasons repeat, and before you know it, decades have passed, and you haven't aged a day. But I aged on the inside. Every time Braun decided to play his games, every time he killed one of us for his entertainment, a piece of me died too, and unlike the others, I started to remember. I watched Martha Simpson develop scurvy in front of my eyes, her teeth falling out, her gums bleeding, her body slowly wasting away until she died screaming. Then she'd be back the next day, perfectly healthy, with no memory of the agony she'd endured. I watched little Timmy Nussbaum slip on ice, his body sliding toward the edge of a cliff, his small hands grasping at nothing as he fell. I heard the sound of his skull cracking against the rocks below. And Harold. God, Harold. Braun made him slip on an icy staircase. I watched my husband tumble down those stairs in slow motion, his arms windmilling, his face frozen in surprise. He landed on a wrought iron fence post at the bottom. The metal spike went through his chest like a spear, pinning him there like a butterfly in a collector's case. His blood dripped onto the white snow, making patterns that looked almost beautiful if you didn't think about what they meant. I held him while he died. It took hours. The spike had missed his heart by inches, so he bled out slowly, coughing blood, trying to tell me something I couldn't understand. When he finally went still, I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, that had broken already. Something deeper, something in my mind that kept me tethered to the illusion. Because that's when I realized the truth. This wasn't paradise. This was hell, and we were its permanent residents. When I woke up the next time, Harold didn't remember dying. Again, he smiled at me over breakfast, asked me about my dreams, told me how much he loved this place, but I saw the blood on the snow every time I closed my eyes. I saw the fence post, the shocked look on his face, the way his fingers had twitched as the life drained out of him. What do you think really happened here? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because the answer is worse than anything you can imagine. The third simulation started on what Braun's terminal later told me was June 11th, though the year was listed only as 12. 12 years into Tranquility Lane, though that couldn't be right. I'd counted decades already. Time in the simulation doesn't match time outside, I learned. A day here could be a minute there, or maybe it was the other way around. Math stopped making sense when you realized the numbers were just more code, more lies. Tranquility Lane, a perfect little suburban neighborhood that looked like it was ripped straight from an American TV show. White houses with porches, perfectly trimmed lawns, a street where children played and neighbors knew each other's names. Braun said it reminded him of his childhood home in Kronach, Germany, though he'd made it distinctly American. Something about that detail stuck with me. Why would a man create a simulation of home but change all the details? What was he running from? Or what was he trying to recreate? This time, Braun didn't just kill our memories of who we'd been. He went deeper. He erased our entire pre-war lives, made us believe we'd always lived on this street, in these houses, in this eternal 1955 that never moved forward or back. The others accepted it completely. Martha became Martha Rockwell, married to Roger. The Nussbaums became the perfect suburban family. Everyone had roles, histories, relationships that felt real, even though they'd been written like lines in a script. Everyone except me. I don't know why my memory came back. Maybe something in my neural patterns resisted the wipes. Maybe I got lucky and unlucky at the same time. Or maybe Braun wanted one of us to know, to remember, to suffer with full awareness of what he was doing to us. I wouldn't put it past him. That's when I met Betty. She looked like a little girl, maybe 8 years old, with pigtails and a dress that belonged in a catalog for happy childhood. She'd skip down the street, humming to herself, stopping to talk to the neighbors. Everyone loved Betty. She was the neighborhood sweetheart, always cheerful, always playing. But her eyes were wrong. I saw it the first time she looked at me. Behind those childish features was something ancient, something cruel. When she smiled, it didn't reach those eyes. They stayed cold and calculating, watching us the way a scientist watches rats in a maze. Betty was Braun, the 260-year-old man who'd invented the GECK, who'd designed Vault 112, who'd trapped us here. He wore the little girl like a costume, playing at innocence while he orchestrated our torments. The first time I tried to tell someone, I approached Roger Rockwell. Nice man, or he would have been if he was real. I grabbed his arm on his front lawn and told him the truth, that we were in a simulation, that Betty was actually a monster, that none of this was real. He looked at me with pity, patted my hand, and called me senile, said maybe I should rest more, that sometimes old folks get confused. The words stung, not because they hurt my feelings, but because I realized Braun had programmed them to dismiss me. Every warning I tried to give bounced off them like water off glass. I was the crazy old lady who said weird things, and that's all I'd ever be. So I stopped trying to warn them. Instead, I started watching, learning, looking for cracks in the code. That's when I discovered the abandoned house. It sat at the end of the lane, boarded up and forgotten. Everyone avoided it instinctively. When I asked why, they'd say it gave them the creeps, or they'd heard strange noises, or they'd just never thought to go there. Classic deflection programming. Make something invisible by making it uninteresting. But I was interested, very interested. I waited until night, when the simulation was at its quietest. The moon hung in the sky like a painted prop, casting shadows that repeated the same patterns every single night. I walked to the abandoned house, my old lady bones creaking with each step, and pushed open the door. Inside, reality glitched. The walls flickered between textures. The floor felt solid one moment and hollow the next. And there were objects scattered around the room. A broken radio, a glass pitcher, a garden gnome, a cinder block, an empty soda bottle. They looked random, but nothing in Braun's simulations was random. I touched the radio, and it made a tone, F, on the musical scale. The pitcher made C. The gnome made D. I went through them all, memorizing the sounds, knowing instinctively that these tones were important. Then I heard her, Betty, whistling outside the house, the same melody, over and over. F, C, D, C, B, D, A. The sound made my blood run cold because I understood what it was. A key, a sequence, a way out. If you've ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments, because the choice I faced would haunt anyone. I wanted to activate whatever this failsafe was right then and there, but something stopped me. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was the knowledge that I was the only one who would understand what we were giving up. The others were happy here, in their programmed ignorance. They didn't remember the deaths, the pain, the centuries of torture. If I freed us, would I be saving them or condemning them? And there was another question that kept me frozen. What if escape meant death? Real, permanent death? Our bodies in those pods were over 200 years old by now, withered, ancient things kept alive only by machines. What would happen to them if we left the simulation? So I left the abandoned house without activating the sequence. I went back to my little home on Tranquility Lane, climbed into my bed, and stared at the ceiling until morning came. Again, like it always did, like it always would. But I couldn't unknow what I knew. The terminal was in that house, hidden behind the tones. The Vault 112 Auxiliary Command Terminal. Braun had called it, in one of his entries, I'd later find fragments of in the code. And in that terminal was a program called the Chinese Invasion, a failsafe that would disable the protections on our pods, a failsafe that would kill us for real when we died in the simulation, a failsafe that could end this nightmare forever. The days blended together after that, or maybe they were years. Time lost all meaning when you knew you were trapped in a loop. I watched Braun play his games with us, using Betty's innocent face to hide his cruelty. He'd make Roger beat Martha, then erase both their memories and reset them as a loving couple. He'd make the Nussbaum boy cry exactly the same way, day after day. I counted. 3,847 times I watched that child's tears, knowing they were just data, just pixels, just another form of torture. And the worst part? I couldn't die. Not really. Every time I tried, every time I thought maybe if I just ended it, I'd wake up again the next morning. My suicide attempts became just another glitch in the system, another anomaly in the data that the robo-brains outside our pods would flag and adjust. My terminal readings showed it. Inconsistent data, anomalies, stress levels off the charts. The machines knew something was wrong with me, but they couldn't fix it. You can't debug awareness. You can't patch consciousness. So I became a ghost in the machine, haunting my own existence, watching the same tragedies play out, while Betty skipped and laughed and hummed her little melody that was really a key to our prison. F, C, D, C, B, D, A. Radio, pitcher, gnome, pitcher, cinder block, gnome, bottle. The sequence burned itself into my brain. I couldn't forget it even if I wanted to. It played in my dreams, in my waking hours, in the spaces between thoughts. Sometimes I'd catch myself humming it, and Betty would turn to look at me with those ancient eyes, and I'd wonder if she knew that I knew. If she did, she never said anything. Maybe that was part of the game too. Maybe Braun liked knowing that one of us was aware, suffering with full knowledge of our situation. Maybe my consciousness was the real experiment, and everyone else was just set dressing. I started leaving myself notes in the code, hidden messages that persisted between resets, little breadcrumbs of sanity to remind myself that I wasn't losing my mind, that this was real, that I had to hold on. Sometimes I'd find notes I didn't remember writing, fragments of thoughts from previous versions of myself who'd also figured it out. They all said the same thing. Wait, someone will come. They have to come. This can't go on forever. But it did go on forever. Day after day, year after year, decade after decade. The suburban nightmare continued, unchanging and eternal. I watched my neighbors die and resurrect 1,000 times. I watched Harold get killed in new and creative ways, never remembering the previous deaths, never knowing that his wife was screaming silently inside. Every time she saw him smile, the only thing that kept me sane was counting. I counted everything. The number of times Betty laughed, the number of flowers in Martha's garden, the number of cracks in the sidewalk, the number of deaths. The numbers became my anchor to reality, proof that time was passing even if nothing ever changed. 10,000 deaths. That's how many I counted before I stopped keeping track. 10,000 times I watched someone I knew die. 10,000 times the simulation reset, and they came back with empty eyes and programmed smiles. And through it all, Betty kept playing, kept skipping, kept whistling that damned melody. I think she knew I was waiting for something, someone, anyone who might stumble into Vault 112 and make their way into the simulation, someone who wasn't part of Braun's collection of toys, someone who might actually be able to activate the failsafe. Because I'd figured out the final piece of the puzzle, I couldn't activate it myself. Braun had made sure of that. The terminal recognized us as residents, as part of the system. We couldn't override our own prison, but an outsider, someone new to the simulation, someone whose code wasn't integrated yet, they could do it. They could end this. So I waited and watched and counted and tried to hold on to my sanity while everything around me screamed in ones and zeros that only I could hear. My name is Thelma Deethers, and I've been trapped in a digital hell for over 200 years. The others don't know. They can't know. Braun made sure of that, but I know. I remember. And I'm still waiting for someone to find the abandoned house, to understand the tones, to activate the Chinese invasion, and finally, let us die for real. Because death would be mercy, death would be freedom, death would be the first real choice any of us have made since we climbed into those pods on October 23rd, 2077. The simulation continues. Betty laughs, the neighbors wave, and I sit on my porch in this eternal afternoon, watching the street that never changes, humming a melody that sounds like hope but tastes like ash. FCDCBDA. Someone will come. They have to. They have to. The worst deaths weren't the violent ones. Those were almost merciful in their speed, their finality. No, the worst deaths were the slow ones. The ones where Braun took his time, savoring every moment of suffering like a fine wine. Martha Simpson. Poor Martha. She was the first one I watched die slowly in Tranquility Lane. And Braun chose scurvy of all things. An old disease, something from the age of sailing ships and long voyages. He programmed it into her code, and I watched as her gums began to bleed. Day after day, her teeth loosened, her skin bruised at the slightest touch. She'd smile at me over the fence, blood staining her lips, and ask how I was doing as if nothing was wrong. It took weeks. The others noticed she looked pale, tired. They'd suggest she see a doctor, but there was no doctor in Tranquility Lane. Just Betty, skipping down the street, watching Martha decay with those ancient eyes hidden behind a child's face. When Martha finally died, she did it alone in her house. I found her 3 days later when Roger asked me to check on her. She was in her bed, her body covered in bruises, her mouth open in a silent scream. The smell was wrong, all wrong, because even the rot was simulated, coded to trigger our disgust response without being real. The next morning, Martha was alive again, healthy, vibrant, waving to me from her garden, no memory of bleeding out slowly, of the pain that had consumed her final weeks. She asked me if I'd like to come over for tea later, and I said yes, because what else could I do? That's when I started to understand the true genius of Braun's torture. It wasn't just about killing us. It was about making us comfortable first, making us feel safe, building up our sense of normalcy before he shattered it. And only I would carry the weight of remembering, of knowing that any moment of peace was just the calm before another storm. I tried to kill myself again after that, walked into the middle of the street and just stood there, waiting for one of the cars to hit me. But the cars always swerved. I tried hanging myself with a rope from my closet, but the rope always broke. I tried drowning myself in the bathtub, but my lungs wouldn't cooperate. The simulation wouldn't let me die on my own terms. Braun controlled even that, so I did something else instead. I started exploring the glitches. Every simulation has bugs, flaws in the code that create anomalies. I'd noticed them before, but dismissed them as random errors. Now I looked closer. There were moments when textures would flicker, when NPCs would repeat the same action twice, when the sky would stutter like a scratched record. These glitches were windows, cracks in Braun's perfect world. I learned to feel them coming. A tingling sensation in my fingertips, a taste like copper in my mouth. When a glitch happened, I could sometimes glimpse what was underneath the simulation. I saw code, endless streams of green numbers on black backgrounds. I saw the real Vault 112. Just for a fraction of a second, the pods lined up like coffins, the robo-brains moving between them with mechanical precision. And once, just once, I saw our bodies. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but those 2 seconds destroyed something fundamental inside me. We were corpses. That's what we looked like. Withered, mummified things with skin like old leather stretched over bones. Our eyes were closed, but machines covered our faces, feeding us oxygen, nutrients, keeping the meat alive, while the mind wandered in digital dreams. I saw my own body, and I didn't recognize it. 73 years old when I went into the pod, but that body was ancient beyond measure, kept alive past any natural lifespan by technology that should never have existed. Harold was next to me. His pod was labeled with his name. I could see the monitors tracking his vitals, the steady beep of a heartbeat that had been beating for over 2 centuries. Inside the simulation, he was young, healthy, full of life. Outside, he was a museum piece, a relic of humanity preserved in amber. The glitch ended, and I was back on my porch in Tranquility Lane. Betty was across the street, staring at me. She'd seen me see. I knew it from the way she tilted her head, the slight smile on her face. She knew I'd glimpsed the truth, and it pleased her. Him, whatever Braun was behind that mask. That night, Harold died again. Betty made him crash through our living room window. The glass cut him in 1,000 places, small wounds that bled and bled until he was lying in a pool of red on our carpet. I held his hand while he died, watching the light fade from his eyes, and I whispered, I remember all of it, every death, every reset. I'm so sorry you can't. He squeezed my hand once before he went still. The next morning, Harold was making breakfast, whistling, asking me if I wanted eggs or pancakes. The window was intact, the carpet was clean, and I was alone again in my knowledge, drowning in memories that no one else could share. I started talking to the robo-brains during glitches. I don't know if they could hear me, but I needed to try. I'd whisper to them through the cracks in reality, begging them to shut down the system, to let us die with dignity. They never responded, just continued their maintenance routines, adjusting our feeding tubes, monitoring our vitals, keeping us alive in our digital prison. The monitors attached to my pod showed constant warnings. Stress levels critical, neural patterns inconsistent, anomalous brain activity detected, but the machines couldn't fix consciousness. They could pump me full of sedatives in the real world, but inside the simulation, I remained aware, a ghost that refused to be exorcised. Years passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning anymore. I watched the seasons cycle in their programmed rhythm. Spring, summer, fall, winter, then spring again. The leaves changed color on the exact same day every year. The first snow fell at precisely 3:47 p.m. every December 1st. The flowers in Martha's garden bloomed in identical patterns. Everything was perfect, controlled, dead. I started leaving messages in unusual places. I'd scratch words into the backs of pictures, hide notes in drawers, write warnings in the condensation on windows. Most of them disappeared with the next reset, but sometimes they persisted. Sometimes I'd find my own handwriting and not remember creating it. Messages from past versions of myself. The tones are the key. Betty is Braun. Wait for the outsider. Radio, pitcher. Gnome, pitcher. Cinder block. Gnome, bottle. We're already dead. That last one haunted me. We're already dead. It was true in a way. Our lives ended on October 23rd, 2077. Everything since then had been a prolonged death. Rattle, consciousness flickering in the ruins of bodies that should have turned to dust decades ago. Braun introduced new tortures. He made Roger beat Martha with a rolling pin, his face twisted in rage that wasn't his own, Martha screaming for mercy that wouldn't come. I counted every blow, 47, before she stopped moving. The next day, they were having a barbecue together, laughing, holding hands. He made little Timmy cry using every method he could devise, made him lose his favorite toy, made his parents fight, made him fall and scrape his knee, made him watch his dog get hit by a car. 3,847 different ways to break a child's heart, and I witnessed every single one. And through it all, Betty kept playing, kept skipping, kept humming that melody that was both prison and key. What would you do if you were me? If you knew escape was possible but might cost everyone their lives? If you were the only one who understood the weight of that choice? I found more fragments in the code. Pieces of Braun's own notes that had somehow leaked into the simulation's background processes. I learned that he'd created the Garden of Eden creation kit before this, that he'd been brilliant once, that something had twisted inside him and turned genius into madness. I learned about Toucan Lagoon from his perspective, how he'd grown bored with paradise, how he decided that suffering was more interesting than joy. The sharks had been his addition, a last-minute inspiration. He'd written about the exquisite screams and satisfying chaos. Harold's death had been entertainment to him. I learned about Slalom Chalet, 23 years of winter torture. He'd written about my impalement on the fence post with something approaching poetry. The old woman's body created beautiful patterns in the snow as it twitched, he'd noted. Her husband's grief was particularly satisfying, but he'd grown bored with that too. Eventually, he always grew bored. Tranquility Lane was different, he'd written. This was sustainable. The false comfort made the terror more acute. The memory wipes meant he could repeat the same tortures endlessly, and they'd always be fresh for his victims. Only, he hadn't counted on me. On my mind somehow resisting the wipes, building up immunity to his attempts to erase me. In his notes, he called me Subject Dethers, Anomaly. He knew I was aware. He'd known for decades. And he'd left me conscious deliberately, because watching someone suffer with full knowledge was more interesting than watching ignorant victims. I was his masterpiece, his greatest success, and his most interesting failure. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that subscribe button. It tells me someone out there is still paying attention to warnings like these. The day everything changed started like any other day. Eternal afternoon, temperature locked at 72 degrees, Betty skipping down the street. But something was different. I felt it in the code, a disturbance in the pattern. Something new was entering the system. I was on my porch when I saw the stranger appear, not fade in, not walk in from off-screen, but literally materialize in the middle of the lane. They looked confused, disoriented, wearing a Vault 112 jumpsuit that was somehow different from ours. Newer, less weathered, real. Betty approached them immediately, all innocent smiles and helpful gestures, but I saw the tension in her posture, the way her avatar struggled to maintain the illusion. This person wasn't supposed to be here. They were a variable Braun hadn't planned for. I watched from my porch as Betty gave them the same speech she'd given 1,000 times before. Welcome to Tranquility Lane. Such a lovely neighborhood. Would they like to meet the neighbors? Would they like to play a game? But this stranger was looking around with eyes that actually saw. They noticed the abandoned house. They noticed how everyone's movements seemed slightly rehearsed. They noticed me, sitting on my porch, and something in my expression must have communicated the truth because they started walking toward me. Don't, Betty called out, her voice still childish but with an edge underneath. Old Lady Dethers is a bit confused. She says strange things. The stranger ignored her and came up to my porch anyway. Up close, I could see they were young, probably early 20s, with eyes that had seen too much too soon. A vault dweller, but not one of ours. Their jumpsuit said 101, not 112. You're not from here, I said. Not a question, a statement of fact. The first truth I'd spoken to anyone in decades. No, they said. I'm looking for my father. James. Someone said he came to Vault 112. James. I searched my memory. A new arrival. But when? Then I remembered. The dog. Doc. That friendly dog that had appeared a few weeks ago in simulation time. Betty had added it, claimed it was a stray. But dogs don't just appear in simulations unless someone codes them in. Your father is here, I said carefully, aware that Betty was listening. But not how you think. The stranger leaned in, and I whispered quickly, knowing I had seconds before Betty intervened. Nothing here is real. We're in a simulation. Betty is actually Braun, the overseer. Your father is the dog. There's a terminal in the abandoned house. The sequence is radio, pitcher, gnome, pitcher, cinder block, gnome, bottle. It activates a failsafe called the Chinese invasion. It will kill everyone, but it will also free us. Betty was walking toward us now, her face still smiling, but her eyes promising retribution. Do you understand? I asked urgently. You're our only chance. I can't activate it myself, but you can. You have to decide if freedom is worth the cost. The stranger nodded slowly, and I saw comprehension dawn in their eyes. They understood. Finally, after all these years, someone understood. Betty reached us then, and suddenly the world glitched hard. I felt reality fracture around me, saw code bleeding through the edges of my vision. The stranger stumbled back, and Betty's face flickered between child and something else, something ancient and angry. You talk too much, old woman, Betty said, and her voice was wrong, deeper, German accent bleeding through. But it doesn't matter. They won't do it. They never do. They're too afraid of what it means to be merciful. She turned to the stranger. But if you want to see what mercy looks like in my world, I have tasks for you. Fun little games. Make the Rockwell boy cry. Break up a marriage. Kill everyone while wearing a special mask I made. Do this, and I'll free your father. Refuse, and he stays a dog forever. The stranger looked between us, clearly torn. I could see the calculation in their eyes. Do the evil tasks and save their father the easy way, or risk the failsafe and potentially doom everyone. The choice is yours, I said softly. But know that whatever you choose, I'll remember. I remember everything. The stranger stood there for what felt like hours, though in simulation time, it was probably only seconds. I could see the war playing out behind their eyes. Save one person the easy way, or risk everything for the slim chance of true freedom. Betty smiled up at them, all innocence and malice wrapped in pigtails. The tasks aren't so hard, she said sweetly. Everyone does them eventually, and it's not like anyone really gets hurt. It's just a game. Just a game. The words made something inside me snap. A game, I repeated, my voice cracking. Harold has died 847 times. I've counted. Martha has been beaten to death 213 times. Timmy has cried 3,847 times. We've been tortured for over 200 years, but yes, it's just a game. The stranger's jaw tightened. They looked at me, really looked at me, and I think they finally saw what I was. Not a program, not an NPC, a prisoner who had been screaming silently for 2 centuries. The abandoned house, they said quietly. Radio, pitcher, gnome, pitcher, cinder block, gnome, bottle, no. Betty's voice cracked, the child facade slipping. For a moment, I saw the real Braun underneath, the withered old man with eyes full of centuries of boredom and cruelty. You'll regret this. They're happy here. Look at them. She gestured wildly at the neighborhood. Roger was mowing his lawn. Martha was tending her flowers. The Nussbaums were playing catch in their yard. Everyone looked peaceful, content, alive. They're happy because they don't know they're dead, the stranger said. They'd figured it out faster than I had, but she knows. They pointed at me. She's been carrying this alone for how long? Too long, I whispered. Far too long. The stranger started walking toward the abandoned house. Betty screamed, a sound that was equal parts child's tantrum and old man's rage. The simulation glitched violently, reality fracturing at the seams. Buildings flickered between textures. The sky turned red, then black, then back to blue. The other residents froze mid-action, their faces blank, puppets with cut strings. "You can't," Betty shrieked. "I won't let you. This is my world, my experiment, mine." But the stranger kept walking. I followed, my old lady legs carrying me faster than they should have been able to. Behind us, I heard Betty's footsteps, but the simulation was fighting her now, responding to the stranger's intent. Walls appeared between her and us. The ground tilted, the code was breaking down, and Braun was losing control. We reached the abandoned house. The door swung open before we could touch it. Inside, the objects were exactly where I'd left them in my memory. Radio, pitcher, gnome, cinder block, bottle, radio. "You know the sequence?" the stranger asked. "I've known it for decades," I said, "but I couldn't activate it myself." Braun made sure of that. Residents are locked out of their own prison. The stranger nodded and moved to the first object. The radio. They touched it, and it sang out its F note, clear and pure. Then the pitcher. C, the gnome. D, back to the pitcher. C, the cinder block. B, the gnome again. D, finally the bottle. A, F, C, D, C, B, D, A. The melody hung in the air like a prayer. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the walls shimmered, and a terminal materialized, old pre-war tech with a green screen and keyboard. The Vault 112 auxiliary command terminal. The stranger moved to it, fingers hovering over the keys. On the screen, I could see the options. Vault 112 auxiliary command terminal, system status, resident monitoring, simulation controls, fail-safe protocols. They selected fail-safe protocols. A new menu appeared, fail-safe protocols warning. These commands will have permanent consequences. Chinese invasion, emergency shutdown, override. Command Chinese invasion, I said. That's the one. It disables the fail-safes on the pods. When we die in here, we die out there too. You're sure? The stranger asked. Once I activate this, there's no going back. Was I sure? I thought about Harold, dying over and over, never knowing why he sometimes woke up screaming from nightmares he couldn't remember. I thought about Martha, beaten and broken, and reset like a broken toy. I thought about Timmy's tears, each one a small eternity of manufactured misery. I thought about my own mind, fractured and pieced back together so many times I couldn't remember who I'd been before the pods. I'm sure, I said. We're already dead. We died in 2077. Everything since then has been a lie. Better to end the lie than live in it forever. The stranger's hand moved to the keyboard. Behind us, Betty was screaming, pounding on invisible walls. Don't do it, please. I'll let everyone go. I'll end the simulation. Just don't leave me alone. Don't leave me alone. If you've ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. Because mercy can look like many things, and sometimes it wears the face of ending. The stranger typed, "Initiate Chinese invasion." The screen flashed red. Text scrolled across it. Warning, Chinese invasion, protocol, activated pod. Failsafes, disabled lethal force. Authorized all residents. Will experience permanent death. This process cannot be reversed. Confirm? Y. N. The stranger looked at me one more time. I nodded. They pressed Y. The world exploded into chaos. The simulation glitched harder than I'd ever seen. Reality tore apart like tissue paper. I saw the code underneath, rivers of green numbers flowing through black void. I saw Vault 112, the pods, the robo-brains. I saw my body, ancient and frail, monitors flashing warnings as the fail-safes disengaged. Then I was back in Tranquility Lane, but it was wrong. The colors were too bright, oversaturated. The sky was bleeding, and from the edge of the simulation, I saw them coming. Chinese soldiers in red uniforms, carrying rifles, their faces hidden behind gas masks. They materialized out of the glitches, marching in perfect formation down our perfect suburban street. The simulation's last act of violence, coded by Braun himself as a failsafe, now turned against his prisoners to grant them freedom. The residents noticed them. Roger stopped mowing. Martha dropped her gardening shears. Timmy's ball bounced away, forgotten. They all saw the soldiers, and for the first time in decades, I saw fear on their faces. Real fear, not programmed emotion. The memory wipes were failing. They were starting to remember. Thelma? Harold appeared next to me, his face confused. Thelma, what's happening? I remember. Sharks. There were sharks. And ice. And his eyes widened with horror as 2 centuries of suppressed memories came flooding back. Oh God, what has he done to us? It's ending, I said, taking his hand. It's finally ending. The soldiers opened fire. Not at us directly, not at first. They shot out windows, destroyed cars, set houses ablaze with fire that looked almost real. The other residents scattered, running, screaming, but there was nowhere to run. This was a simulation, a finite space with invisible walls. Martha Rockwell died first, 3 shots to the chest. She fell in her garden, her blood watering the flowers that had never been real. But this time, she didn't get back up. This time, the death was permanent. In Vault 112, her pod's monitors flatlined. A body that had lived for 260 years finally found rest. Roger ran to her, cradling her body, and the soldiers shot him too. He died holding his wife, and I hoped that somewhere in the code they knew they were together at the end. The news bombs tried to hide in their house. The soldiers went in after them. I heard screams, shots, then silence. Another family freed from the prison. Betty stood in the middle of the street, and the soldiers walked past her without firing. She was immune, protected by Braun's admin privileges. She watched her playthings die with an expression that cycled through rage, grief, and finally, terrible understanding. She was going to be alone, truly, permanently alone, trapped forever in a simulation with no one to torture, no one to entertain her, no one to break. This was Braun's punishment for creating hell, to be locked inside it for eternity with no company but his own thoughts. "You've killed me," Betty whispered, but her voice was Braun's now. No more pretense. "You've killed me in the only way that matters." "Good," I said. The soldiers were coming for us now. Harold stood next to me, his hand in mine. He looked at me with eyes full of remembered pain and current clarity. "I'm sorry I couldn't remember," he said. "I'm sorry you had to carry it alone. You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." The soldiers raised their rifles. I saw the stranger in the distance, untouched, watching. Next to them was a dog, but as I looked closer, I saw the dog's form flickering, becoming a man, James, the stranger's father. He was transforming back, freed from Braun's last cruel joke. I closed my eyes. After 200 years of dying, I finally knew what it felt like to face death with full awareness and acceptance. This wasn't murder, this was mercy. This was the kindness the wasteland had forgotten how to give. The shots rang out. I felt the impact, felt my avatar's code beginning to dissolve. But more than that, I felt the connection to my real body breaking, the monitors in the pod screaming warnings, the robo-brains rushing to intervene but finding nothing to fix, the life support shutting down as the fail-safe protocols did their work. My 260-year-old body, withered and wrong, finally giving up its fight against the inevitable. Harold died first. I felt his hand go slack in mine. Then I felt myself falling, the simulation crumbling around me. The code was breaking apart, returning to nothing, and I was breaking apart with it. My last thought wasn't of fear. It was relief. Pure, crystalline relief. After 2 centuries of digital hell, Thelma Deethers was finally, truly free. I don't know if there's anything after. I don't know if consciousness survives death, if there's some new simulation waiting, some other level of reality. All I know is that in my final moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since October 23rd, 2077, peace. The stranger stood in the empty simulation afterward, I imagine, walked those streets that were now just data and code, saw the bodies that would fade away, leaving nothing behind, found their father, freed from his canine prison, ready to continue whatever quest had brought them here, and Betty, poor, monstrous Betty, still standing in the street, alone, watching her perfect world empty of victims. Braun would remain there, trapped in his own creation, unable to die, unable to escape, unable to do anything but exist in the suburban hell he'd created. His punishment would be time itself, endless and merciless. The very thing he'd inflicted on us returned 1,000-fold. Sometimes I wonder if he's still there, still standing in that street, still waiting for new residents to arrive who never will, still wearing the face of a little girl because he can't remember how to be anything else. But that's his nightmare now, not ours. The monitors in Vault 112 went dark one by one. The RoboBrains filed reports about system failures, catastrophic pod malfunctions, total resident loss. They continued their maintenance routines because that's what they were programmed to do, tending to empty pods in a vault full of corpses, forever faithful to a purpose that no longer mattered. And in the wasteland above, life continued. The stranger and their father left Smith Casey's garage, returned to the poisoned world, and carried on with whatever struggles waited for them in the ruins of America. They'd made the hard choice, the merciful choice, the choice that looked like murder but was really salvation. I hope they don't regret it. I hope they understand that some prisons can only be escaped through their destruction. I hope they know that somewhere in the code, in the final moments before dissolution, we thanked them. My name was Thelma Deethers. I was 73 years old when I entered Vault 112 on October 23rd, 2077. I died, truly died, sometime around 2277, though exact dates don't matter much when you've been dead inside for decades. I spent 200 years remembering what everyone else forgot. I carried the weight of 10,000 deaths. I watched paradise turn to torture and learned that hell isn't fire and brimstone. Hell is perfection that never changes, happiness that isn't real, and the knowledge that you're trapped in both forever. But in the end, I found freedom. Not in escape, not in victory, but in ending. And if you ever find yourself in a vault promising eternal life in virtual paradise, remember this story. Remember Old Lady Dithers. Remember that some gifts are prisons, some promises are lies, and sometimes the greatest mercy is the courage to let go. The simulation is empty now. The pods are cold. The RoboBrains wait for residents who will never come. And somewhere in the ashes of Tranquility Lane, a melody still plays. FCDCBDA. Radio pitcher, gnome pitcher. Cinder block, gnome, bottle. The sound of freedom. The sound of ending. The sound of mercy, finally granted after 2 centuries of waiting.